The Samsung HW-Q990B is an 11.1.4 channel soundbar with a whopping 22 audio drivers. Indeed, it has upward, sideward, frontal and also dedicated rear firing drivers, therefore giving you the best Dolby Atmos and DTS:X experience. Now, it doesn't come cheap. In the UK and at the time of filming, it can be found between £1,600 and £1,390, while in the US it can be found for roughly $1,900 all the way down to $1,300. In this review, you're going to see if it's actually worth its price tag and furthermore how it compares to its predecessor, the HW-Q950A. So to kick off this review, I do want to talk about its design because it has been updated from its predecessor. Now, first off, the dimensions will be on your screen right now so you can see if it will actually fit on your setup. You can wall mount it or, like in my case, place it on a cabinet, whereby I've got it in front of a 55-inch TV and in this respect actually fits perfectly. Now, the soundbar itself is very sleek and stylish and doesn't obscure any of the bottom view that you might have like you'd find on, let's say, the Sennheiser Ambeo Soundbar, which is pretty chunky to say the least. Now, the soundbar itself has got a metal grille that stretches all the way around, protecting all those drivers that are housed within. The same could be said about the pretty stylish rear speakers, which have also been updated in terms of their look and are quite fitting in terms of the modern aesthetics that Samsung is going for. Now, the wireless subwoofer has also changed, whereby it still has an 8-inch driver inside, but the design of it and therefore the way that it's actually coping with the bass has slightly altered, and we'll touch upon this further down in this review in the sound quality section. What I will say over here is that it does connect over wirelessly to the soundbar, and I've got no issues whatsoever, specifically when it comes to latency. Now, elsewhere, Samsung has brought back a display at the front of the soundbar, which is definitely appreciated because it allows you to know what settings you're adjusting from afar. Indeed, the previous iteration had the display at the top of the soundbar, which made it counterintuitive. Now, thankfully, the Q990B also has got physical buttons, which prevents any sort of mistouch operations. For example, if you have kids or pets in the home, then you don't have to worry about them changing any sort of settings, at least, of course, unless they press on them. Now, if you do want to control any sort of settings on the soundbar from afar, you have got a bundled remote. It's very stylish and sleek, and for those who might be aware, it's very similar to what the manufacturer provides with their televisions. Now, this does have its pros and cons, whereby it is familiar on one hand, but on the other hand means that some people might be confusing their TV remotes for their soundbar remotes. So I would be intrigued to know what you make of the new soundbar remote down in the comment section below. So moving on, we get on to the app. So through the main interface here, you can see where the sound is coming from, and if you tap it, you can dynamically change the source, which is very handy. Now, if we go back, you've got the volume controls, and then you've got the different sound modes which you can flick through. Then you've got the equalizer. Now, it's worth bearing in mind over here, you only have bass and treble if you were to use, for example, any of the sound modes such as adaptive, game or surround. If, however, you go on the standard mode preset, you will suddenly see a multi-band equalizer, which is far better with a few preset EQs, although you'll probably want to tinker around with it yourself. Now, in my case, I much prefer using adaptive sounds, which therefore means that I'm limited to only the bass and treble adjustments only. Now, as for the woofer controls, they are separate, and of course you can adjust it depending on your own room's acoustics. And on that note, you've got auto EQ, which effectively optimizes the bass response based on your room's acoustic. It goes through a little bit of a tuning process, doesn't take too long, and then you can enable or disable it. I found that having it enabled seemed to result in a slightly better sound quality. Now, on that note, you do also have space fit sound and active voice amplifier should you wish to enable or disable them, and we'll touch upon these further down in the review. Now, as for the advanced sound settings, you have the voice enhancement, bass enhancement and also night modes should you wish to enable them. Now, at the top right hand corner, the little three dots, if you were to click on device settings, you've got the ability to enter Bluetooth pairing mode, check your network level and also independently adjust all the different channels, which is great to see it actually finally included over here from Samsung, because normally it would be only included via the physical remote. So here you've got all the different adjustments, and these are all present via the physical remote as well. You can also change the rear speaker mode, in other words, change them from front, in other words, place where the soundbar is, or in a more traditional format, towards the rear. So in other words, at the back as to where your ears would be near. Hopefully you have the ability to actually place it there. Then through the three dots, you've also got the Alexa settings, Spotify settings, and you can find some further information. In other words, check for firmware updates. Now, in order for you to connect up to the app, the soundbar must support Wi-Fi, and indeed it does. And this is quite handy, not only to connect up to the Samsung SmartThings app, but also to play back music or, of course, watch your movies directly via Wi-Fi when connected up to a relevant Samsung television. This is, of course, if you do not want to use a wired connection for any given reason. Now, this is also more important because this is the first soundbar that I've come across that has wireless Dolby Atmos support. Now, alas, I was not able to test this because I do not have a select brand new Samsung television, and therefore I am not able to actually test or attest to this, but in this respect, it is actually listed on the manufacturer's website. Now, similarly over here, it is listed that the model will have Google Chromecast, although if you do look down on the spec page, you will actually see that Chromecast is not supported. I suspect over here, very much like the previous iterations, that it will come in at a future date via firmware updates, but I can't really say yes or no to this because I don't work for Samsung. What I will say is that in my case, via an Android smartphone, I was not able to use Google Chromecast. However, on the flip side, it has got that built-in Alexa, Spotify Connect, and it has also got Apple AirPlay 2 for those people who are iOS users. Now, in terms of wireless connectivity, you do also have got Bluetooth, although it's limited to the lowest quality SBC codec, which is quite baffling for a flagship soundbar, but nonetheless, I suspect given the other inputs that you've got, specifically over Wi-Fi, that Bluetooth will be only used as a last resort. Now, on that note, we should talk about the higher quality transmissions, and by that I mean wired inputs. Now, here you have got optical, or better still, you have got two HDMI inputs. Here they will have 4K HDR pass-through, although it's slightly a shame to see that the HDMI 2.1 standard hasn't been used, and from a few sources that I saw online, it means that you cannot use a modern day console to run 4K 120Hz via the soundbar, but of course you can plug it in if your television does support it. Now, aside from this, it has got an HDMI eARC output, and of course the eARC metadata is backwards compatible to ARC, so therefore if you have an older television, you don't have to worry about it. The only thing worth considering is that eARC will give you uncompressed Dolby Atmos or DTSX, whereby the ARC standard will give you a little bit more compression and therefore might not give you the highest fidelity that one can attain. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's get on to a sound demo. First off, I'll be playing back a music track, and it's from Priya J. It's titled Like Me. And then I'll be going to a piece to camera whereby I'll be presenting the Citroen C5X on Totally EV. If you want links to the reviews or, of course, the song, do check it down in the description below. Now, I would like to give you a disclaimer that listening over to a YouTube demo over my microphones is never going to be ideal and isn't going to give you a lifelike reproduction. If you want the best sort of experience, you'll have to be sat in front of it. But I wouldn't go by doing a YouTube review without actually giving you an audio demo. Now, also do pay attention on the screen to the annotations because it'll also give you a little inclination of the sound modes that the Q990B is actually running on.
Music so loud, she shout that number like she playing bingo. Don't make us freeze like a sitcom. Before we get home, when our lit comes through, when it hits kung fu, your eyes don't lie and they snitched on you. Don't act like you ain't noticed me. See that you are focusing on
available as a plug-in hybrid, and it starts from roughly £36,500. That is at least for the Sense Plus, and if you go up the trim levels, it can be found for just shy of £40,000 for the Shine Plus, and that's exactly what we have on review. If you want a breakdown of the different trim levels, do check out our detailed written review that can be found down in the description below. Now hopefully those audio demos gave you a little bit of a snippet as to how the soundbar performs. I'll get on to my subjective opinion very shortly, but before doing so, I would like to touch upon the audio configuration of the soundbar. Now here you've got an 11.1.4 channel configuration that outputs a quoted 656 watts, at least according to Samsung USA. For some reason it's omitted on Samsung UK's website. Now here you have got the 0.4, which constitutes to 4 upward firing drivers. You've got 2 on the main soundbar unit and 1 on each of the rear drivers. Then you've got the 0.1, which is the subwoofer, and then you've got the 11 channel configuration, whereby it constitutes with the rest of the audio drivers found on the rear speakers and of course the main soundbar unit. In total, you've got 22 audio drivers, which is absolutely impressive. Now, aside from all of this, I should mention that the audio driver position on the main soundbar unit itself is forward facing, upward facing, sideward facing, and front side facing as well. As for the rear drivers, you have got forward, upward, and sidewards. In other words, outwards, sidewards, and therefore means that you've really got that sort of room filling experience. And yet again, very impressive, and we'll touch upon the Soundstage performance further down. Now, aside from all that hardware, there is also some clever software that Samsung has implemented in the Q990B. In my case, I left the Auto EQ feature enabled. This is a calibration feature that is present on the subwoofer. It calibrates itself to the room's acoustics, and in my case, I actually felt that it provided a heightened audio experience. Now, the same couldn't be quite said about Space Fit Sound, where there's minor differences in terms of the sound, but for me, it seemed to degrade the overall audio. Effectively, this tries to calibrate all the other drivers to your room's acoustics, but in this respect it just didn't really work out for me, but it might work out for you. Now, there is also the Q Symphony feature, but I was not able to test for this because I do not have a modern Samsung television. Now, aside from this, there is a few other features that you can enable or disable, such as you might have seen via the app or via the remote control, such as the active voice amplifier feature, which for me just didn't result in any sort of differences in terms of the voices being portrayed, from news broadcast to piece to camera, like when I was presenting the Citroen C5X on Totally EV, or for the likes of movies or indeed music videos. I just didn't feel the vocals came out to the foreground. However, if you do want vocals to come to the foreground, you might want to enable the voice enhancement feature, and this really does make a massive difference to the overall mid-range. Yes, it does affect the other frequency tones, but when it comes to the mids, in other words, for the vocal tones, you're really going to get them to the foreground, and therefore very handy, for example, if you are consuming that content that I've just mentioned. Similarly over here, if you do like quite a bit of bass, you might want to adjust it in terms of the EQ, which I touched upon on the app section, or you can also enable the bass enhancement feature, which really does seem to bolster the lower end tones. Finally, you've also got the night mode, which, as the name might suggest, does seem to result in terms of a little bit of a quieter experience, and this can be handy if you do not want to be disturbing your neighbors or anyone that you're living with. Now, aside from all of this, there are 4 sound mode presets that you can select through the app or indeed via the remote control. They are Standard, Gain Pro, Adaptive, and also Surround. In my case, I actually much preferred using Adaptive, no matter if I was gaming, watching content, or indeed listening back to my favorite tracks. So with that in mind, how does the soundbar actually perform? Well, I will say, very much like the Q950A, that the Q990B is absolutely stellar across the frequency range and among one of the best soundbars that I've heard to date. Now, it's slight little improvements that Samsung have made, making it a slight bit better than the 950A, but not exactly a night and day difference, very much more subtle differences. There's a wideband tweeter found on the main soundbar unit, therefore adjusting to the little bit of the higher frequency tones, making them just a little bit more crisper, and then the subwoofer unit, which has been redesigned, does seem to extend a little bit lower. So let me break it down in terms of the sound frequency range. First off, you've got the sub-bass tones. And here indeed that subwoofer does produce those good sort of low-end tones and is an improvement over previous iterations that Samsung has currently produced. Can it compete with dedicated hi-fi setups or indeed some of its competitors, such as likes of the creative SXFI Carrier? Not quite, but it is still very impressive to say the least. Will give you loads of rumble, specifically on a small to medium sized room, and there's no complaints in my case with the sub bass tones that it produces. Now as for the mid bass tones, they're absolutely faultless, at least in my opinion, and it's very much the same that could have been said about the Q950A. Indeed, over here they're very much got good amount of quantity and also quality. The drivers positioned on the soundbar unit itself and the rear facing drivers combine to provide a very engaging sound, one that can be appreciated if you're listening back to R&B, D&B, or for example EDM tracks. Now as for the mid-range, it is a little bit pushed back in terms of the lower mids. I am really being quite picky over here because on the grander scheme of things it is absolutely very impressive to say the least, but in comparison to some of its competitors out there, it isn't exactly class leading. I don't think Samsung is very much renowned for providing very much forward sounding mid-range soundbars, but there's a few exceptions here and there. But in this respect, the Q990B isn't exactly its forte. You will still get fantastic mid-range tones. You will also get ones that are also very accurate and also have got good EQ headroom, but aren't exactly the ones that I would go for if mid-range is your utmost priority in a soundbar. Now as for the highs, they extend extremely well, and given that wideband tweeter, it also does provide a very good sort of zingy nature at the top end. Yet again, no problems whatsoever. It didn't seem rolled off in the slightest and gave me that sort of excitement and that toe tapping feeling that one might want to attain. Now as for the Soundstage, this is by far its biggest trait, because not only are you adding the rear speakers, but due to the sheer number of drivers that you've got and the optimization that Samsung has done, the Q990B, very much like the Q950A, absolutely excels. And I'm not just speaking about the heightened metadata of Dolby Atmos or DTS:X, but also one that will be included on, let's say, if you're listening to regular terrestrial TV or watching, let's say, regular stereo YouTube videos, potentially like this one. And here the drivers really do upmix really well, including the rear drivers, and then providing that room filling experience. One that in my opinion is pretty much unparalleled and is the only soundbar that I can really think of that can really give you that cinematic experience. Now to give you somewhat of a taster, and yet again it's not ideal over YouTube using my microphones, I'm going to go on to Transformer Age of Extinctions. Yet again, do pay attention for the annotations down below, where we'll be switching between Dolby Digital and Dolby Atmos. Now hearing those small little nuances over YouTube might be a little bit hard to pick out, but I can safely say that when you're sat in front of the soundbar unit itself, you can really hear the difference between PCM and Dolby Digital, and in Dolby Digital and Dolby Atmos. Indeed, here the heightened audio data that you're going to get via Dolby Atmos or DTS:X is certainly impressive, so much so that you're going to feel that you're almost like sitting in a cinema, but instead in your living room. Now in my case, I feel that Samsung is somewhat unmatched in this department. See, they're the only manufacturer that I can think of that provides a fantastic sounding soundbar that pairs up to rear firing drivers and also a real competent subwoofer. Of course, there's some other offerings out there that offer somewhat of a mix and match of what I've just mentioned, but none, in my opinion, that provide you the somewhat complete package. Now, just further expanding on that, the Soundstage, the instrument separation is pretty much unbelievable, because you have got that upward, sideward, front sideward, and also front facing drivers on the soundbar unit. And then you've also got the rear drivers, which have also got the upward, front, and sideward firing drivers as well, which just results in a really, really impressive performance. Now this just really leads me on to my verdict, and you can pretty much see where I'm going with this. The HW-Q990B is an improvement over the Q950A. Albeit not being a massive upgrade, it is still one that can certainly be appreciated. And given the fact that the Q950A might be a little bit hard to find, it means that the Q990B will be my top recommendation going forwards, and as a result it gets my Best Buy award. Now, of course, consider there are some alternatives, including the Q950A, which, if you can still get your hands on it, make for an excellent alternative. Now, I'll be intrigued to hear which soundbar you would pick down in the comment section below. And of course, if you've liked this independent detailed review, definitely do drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification, all of which are greatly appreciated and allows me to continue delivering honest reviews like this one. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.